Welcome, everyone. My name is Mary Kay Larson. I am Director of Communications for the Lake Oswego School District. And with me today are all of the wonderful counselors and social workers and school psych that make up our LOSD CARES team, which stands for Connection and Resilience in Education series. Today, we're hosting the third of our 3 workshops planned for this school year, but we are making plans for doing it again, continuing this work into next school year. Today, we are doing a lunchtime session with Tara Rolstad, who is a parent, speaker, and advocate. I know Tara personally. She's a parent of several students here in Lake Oswego School District, and her youngest and my youngest have gone up through Hallinan and Lake Ridge Middle and are now at the high school together. And they also have run cross country together. So I know Tara as a mom and a wonderful friend. And a couple years ago, she had mentioned and had shared that she was getting into work and advocacy related to children and mental health. And specifically, she talked about being a comedian at mental health conferences, which I thought, I don't know, how do you do that? But if you know Tara, you know she does it with amazing grace and humility and humor. And that's why I'm really excited to have you all here today. She hosted a session at Lake Ridge Middle School a couple years ago from 9 to 1, and it was Shattering Stigma Through Stories. And I remember going to it on a Saturday in my workout gear thinking, I'll go and support my friend and maybe make an appearance and then I'll duck out. And I remember texting my family saying, this is too good and way too important. I'm here for the day. You know, I'll see you this afternoon. So I hope that you all have that same experience. I know we're here for an hour, and without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Tara, and I will stop sharing my screen so we can see her face and see each other. So with that, Tara Rolstad.
Thank you, Mary Kay. And thank you for asking me, even though you know me as a mom. I think that's a sign of confidence that may or may not be deserved, but we'll see. So hello, Lake Oswego parents and Lake Oswego school folks, whoever is here with us today. Today, we are going to talk about creating communities that get it right on mental health. Because when a community gets it right on mental health, lives are saved and lives are changed. We're going to talk about our kids, our community, and mental health. We're going to talk about what to look for and when to get help. And I'll share a little of the lessons that I've learned on my family's journey. You may believe that you are the only person who signed in today who is worried about your child, your friend, family member, or coworker. Maybe you're worried about your own mental health experience. But what I want you to know is that you are not alone. You're not. And in just a moment, we're going to try and do an exercise that will demonstrate how mental health affects all of us. So let me share my screen and we will get started. Here's what you need to do. Everybody's looking at this, hopefully probably on a laptop or something. And you need to go to your phone as well. So get your phone out while you're looking at this and go to the website that's at the top of this page. It's menti.com, MENTI.com. And there's a code up there at the top that you can enter, 1-866-8013. So I'm going to give you a second for everybody to go there and get there. And then what's going to happen is I'll ask just a couple of questions and you'll have the chance to answer them completely anonymously, but we'll all get to see the answers together. So if folks would kind of give me a thumbs up when you're there and it's working and you can see the slide, that would be awesome. Yeah, all right, I'm seeing a couple of thumbs up. I am going to, in a moment, read off a list of mental health issues. And as I do, they're going to come up on the screen, and I want you to mark every one that affects you or someone you love or that's close to you, like a family member, child, spouse, close friend. All right, so here we go. You're just going to mark the ones that might apply to you. Depression, suicidal thoughts, bipolar disorder, eating disorder, addiction, schizophrenia. And I know that there are people who are still coming in. So as you come in to the presentation, welcome. And if you are looking at this on one screen, you're gonna, if you like, get another screen. So if you're looking on a laptop, get your phone, go to the website at the top of the page, menti.com, and put in that code, and you'll be able to catch up with where we are. We're just answering some anonymous questions and taking a look at how this affects all of us. And I've got another screen with a similar list, a few more issues. Oh, there's still dots flying. I just love this so much. I'll wait just a couple of minutes while more dots pop up. And as they do, I want you to look at these and kind of absorb the fact you are not alone. Here's that other list. Have you or someone close to you ever experienced abuse or domestic violence, loss of a loved one to suicide, PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, parenting a child with a mental health issue, child of a parent with a serious mental health issue, or severe anxiety and anxiety disorder? This is great. I really appreciate everybody doing this because I think it gives us such an important picture of what we're all going through together. So look at these dots. Let's go back and look at the other screen. It should have, yep, all of our dots are still there. Kind of absorb that for a second. And I'm curious what your response was when you saw those dots, when you saw those results. You should have an option on your screen, your Menti screen, to put in some answers, just a few words, whatever seems to represent the way you felt about that. And those are going to pop up here for us all to see as well. Heartbreaking, overwhelmed, surprised, lots of need out there, solidarity, connection, teary, commonality, relief, awareness. Thank you so much. Whether you live with mental illness or you love someone who does, you are not alone. And in the mathematically unlikely situation in which you did not click any of the little bubbles, you're still here, which says to me that you care and you want to learn more. So thank you so much. I'll stop my screen share for right now. And as we continue, if you have any questions that come up, know that we've set aside a fairly lengthy time at the end of our session to do some Q&A, and you'll be able to submit questions to the meeting hosts, so Mary Kay and the counselors and social workers that are on the committee, and they'll bring those up to me later. And again, they won't be, we'll keep that confidential and anonymous. So be writing those down as you think of them, or jot them down and send them to the hosts as you think of them. Now, here's a quick rundown on my credentials, why I'm speaking with you today. Spoiler alert, I'm not a mental health provider. I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a doctor. I am here representing just lived life experience. I have an MBA and spent years in nonprofit executive management, and none of that is relevant or was relevant when several years ago, my husband and I took in nieces who'd had a really abusive childhood and came to us with corresponding mental health issues. I am still the primary family member for those girls, And they're in their late 20s now, mid 20s, and I'm also legal guardian for one of them who not only lives with mental health issues, but also a severe traumatic brain injury. I'm also mom to 3 teens who have grown up here in the Lake Oswego School District. One's at college, I've got a freshman, and I have a senior at Lake Ridge High School right now. And in the course of producing my mental health conferences called Shattering Stigma with Stories that Mary Kay mentioned, I've spoken to hundreds of families and individuals about their mental health experiences. So that's who I am, and that's why I am with you today. And all of this work started for me when we fostered our nieces. By the time they came to us, our girls had lived through years of horrible abuse and were experiencing severe PTSD, depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder. Oh, I said that. They experienced it severely though, so I'll list it twice, and intense suicidality. The next several years were filled with the girls' crises, chaos, suicide attempts, multiple inpatient psych unit stays, and long stays in residential mental health care. And I want you to know what helped me and what helped my girls and my family survive those years. It was the hope, the connection, and the support that I found here in this community. Too many people with mental health and too many of their family members never get that support. So that's what we want to change today. Because right now, when it comes to struggling with mental health, that's a lot of us, especially our kids. Rates of depression and anxiety and suicide were rising significantly in our youth population before the pandemic ever hit. And not surprisingly, studies indicate that about half of adults this year have found themselves more anxious and depressed than ever before. And about half of us are very concerned about our kids' mental health. Before my nieces lived with us, everything I knew about mental health, I'd pretty much picked up in women's magazine articles. This was the olden days when people still read magazines. And those years were a hardcore crash course. And I learned that treatment for mental health is very much an art. Diagnosis is not easy. It often takes a long time to find the right treatment. There can be unpleasant side effects, and sometimes the treatment stops working and you have to start all over again. And I also began to learn how subconsciously we often think of those who struggle with mental health issues or mental illness as them. Let's do a quick recap of the facts, right? Quick recap, because they're not them, they're us. 1 in 4 adults will experience a mental health issue in their lifetime. 1 in 5 of us every year, and 1 in 5 of our kids every year. Mental health is something we all experience. It's no different than cardiovascular health or gastrointestinal health or elbow health. It's a body organ, the brain. And so it's something that on average takes between 7 and 10 years to get diagnosed. And then once you have the diagnosis, every year, half of people with a mental health diagnosis don't get the help they need. Half of them in any 1 year. The longer a person lives with a mental health issue without treatment, the more difficult recovery becomes and the longer it will take. And that's important because recovery is the reality for most mental health issues that we experience. Recovery is the reality, and we don't talk about that enough. And that's true not just for those of us who may live with a diagnosable mental health disorder, but also for those of us who lived with and through 2020. Because over the past year, we have collectively experienced grief, anxiety, depression, uncertainty on a level most of us have never before experienced. Many of us found ourselves struggling with productivity, struggling to focus, motivation, irritability, obsessive Google News refreshing, and a general feeling of overwhelming impending doom. I don't think that was just me, was it? And look, sadness is an entirely sensible response sometimes, and feeling depressed and anxious right now, I would still say is pretty normal. Doesn't make you feel better, but you're not alone. We have walked with our families through a year with no precedent no rules, no guidelines. I intended to tell you at this juncture that you couldn't find any parenting pandemic books in the bookstore. I know that that's actually not true because of a rabbit trail I went down putting this together this week. And I found many, many, many books about pandemic parenting, but none of them came out until last fall. And frankly, that just made me feel inadequate about my own pandemic accomplishments because I thought, well, why didn't I write a pandemic parenting book? I didn't even learn a language. I only made sourdough once before I killed it. And I didn't even macrame anything, nothing, zero macrame hangers here. That is not the point right now. The point is, almost overnight, we all went from obsessing and battling over screen time to being grateful that our kids could just connect through video games and Snapchat. Our kids went from being cradled in this supportive community net of teachers, other school adults, coaches, bus drivers, youth groups leaders, scouts, their friends. They went from that supportive community net to a support system of us, just us, for way too long. So there's a reason that this feels like it's been hard. It's because it's been hard. Hard with no roadmap, hard on us, hard on our kids. And for most humans on the planet, 2020 was a legit traumatic experience with the side effects and hallmarks of trauma. And 2021, frankly, not proven to be that much better yet. We know there's three kinds of trauma, right? We know that there's acute trauma, which is a single difficult event. There's chronic trauma, which is repeated exposure to highly stressful events, and that can include experiences like bullying or child abuse or pandemics, and then complex trauma, which results from exposure to multiple traumatic events over time. What factors make trauma worse? Well, uncertainty, chronic in nature, lack of control or agency, and no clear endpoint. So yeah, right now, we've been helpless while this pandemic upended our lives. And for most of us, it has caused ongoing low-level chronic trauma, from the hypervigilance of doom scrolling, right? The anxiety of not knowing if we or our loved ones would get sick, never knowing if there would be a lockdown, another lockdown that would complicate our social work and family lives, and no control over any of it. Not to mention 2020's social unrest, wildfires, politics, slightly stressful election, and in 2021, ice storms and power outages. That all was and is trauma. Additionally, some of us have lost family and friends to COVID-19 this year. So it's okay to name it. It's okay to say it was trauma. But no, I'm not saying that we're all, because we've experienced trauma and our children have experienced trauma, that we're all going to be permanently traumatized or have PTSD. That's not the case. Humans are very resilient. And the support we have or build around us can help us experience and move through trauma without long-lasting effect. But I think particularly in developed countries like the US, and frankly, in more affluent communities like Lake Oswego, the pandemic felt like an affront to the way we live, work, and parent. And it resulted in this cognitive dissonance. How dare there be a communicable disease that we can't treat or prevent? How dare I be expected to work from home whether I want to or not? How dare I be expected to homeschool from home while working from home? And possibly while giving a talk on a Wednesday during lunch when my kids are off and they might walk in at any moment and ask me where the pickles are. Hopefully that will not happen. But that indignation and disbelief was rooted in our normal expectations. We can't assume that those normal expectations work anymore. And not only that, we can't even assume that friends, family, or casual social contacts share any of our feelings about this because we're all on different sides. That's clear from the exceedingly careful conversations we have to have about every little thing right now. Do you want to wear a mask? Oh, no, I don't need a mask. I've got vaccine. If you not that, it's okay if you didn't get the vaccine. Should I wear a mask? Is this enough social distance right now? I mean, how much social distance is enough outside? What about inside? What about how social distance should we be if I'm inside and you're outside? It's exhausting, exhausting. All of this makes our brains very uncomfortable, which makes our brains tired and cranky. That's true for us, and it's true for our kids. So we're all stressed out, varying degrees of anxious and depressed, and worried about our kids. What can we do to help? What can we do for our families and for our communities? Before we go any further, I'm going to reassure you that just like anything else to do with peopling, you're going to screw up. And that's okay. Just keep trying. All of the suggestions I make and the ideas that you come up with, you don't have to have the perfect words. You don't have to have the perfect knowledge set. You don't have to have the perfect answers. You just need to be there. It isn't about perfection, it's about caring. So the first thing to do is to make sure on an ongoing basis that your child knows that mental health struggles are normal. And mental health issues, just like physical health issues, are part of the human experience. It's not weird, it's normal. Sometimes we can deal with it ourselves, and sometimes we need to get a little extra help. And when people get help for their mental health problems, they likely get better. Now, because of my nieces and what we went through with them, we've had that conversation on an ongoing basis with our kids for years, since the oldest was in about first grade. And in fact, they would tell you that I talk too much about brain science and brains, but I'm fine with that. In fact, it kind of fits in with my parenting philosophy and approach to pornography, which is that I'm going to talk about pornography so much that should they ever be tempted to look at it, they can't help but think of me and hear my voice. So I'm pretty sure that's going to be effective. I digress. Don't underestimate the power of good modeling for your kids, especially if you live with a mental health condition. If you live with mental health struggles, talk about it. Talk about it as part of your daily routine. Talk about how you manage it. Talk about it like any other health issue that you manage. We especially need to be open with our kids about our family history. Would you tell your kid if there was a family history of cancer? Would you tell your kid if there was a family history of alcoholism or other addiction problems? We need to tell our kids about family history of mental health issues, whether it's depression or bipolar disorder, any other mental health issue. You should talk to them about it, including the symptoms that they should be aware of and when they might want to consider getting help. And by the way, if there is a family history of either bipolar disorder, anxiety, or psychosis, we need to speak frankly to our kids about the risks of self-medicating, and specifically marijuana. They need to know the risks, because often that can make mental health issues worse. And in some cases, it's believed that it can switch on latent genetic tendencies. So we got to be open about that with them as well. Let your kids see you treat yourself as a priority. Self-care is not a cliche. It is not about bubble baths and a glass of wine. It is real. It needs to be something you focus on and they see that you focus on in a way that is meaningful and impactful. Watch your language. How do you talk about mental health? We are learning as a society not to make jokes anymore about, oh, she's so bipolar, she won't make up her mind, or we try hard not to talk about, we're learning not to say that someone committed suicide. Instead, we're learning to say someone died by suicide. It may feel awkward at first, but if you think about it, what do people commit? Crimes. So we need to watch our language. 2 years ago, I spoke to the entire student body at Lake Ridge Junior High and spoke to the PE classes all day long and asked them what the myths are that they'd heard about mental illness. And I have to tell you, it was rough. We clearly have some work to do, because to hear 6th, 7th, and 8th graders tell you that they have heard people say, depression isn't real, you're just trying to get attention, this is just a phase, you're going to grow out of it. We need to be able to have hard conversations with our kids, our friends, and each other. Whether it's anxiety, suicidal thoughts, drug use, or self-harm, let them know that they can talk to you, and then don't freak out. And then if you do freak out, go back and make it right. And listen. Similarly, just like we can change the conversation in our families, we can change the conversation in our community. So don't underestimate the impact of your actions in your circle of friends in your community. We need to choose to be open and vulnerable whenever we can, because if we don't, we get fake book, right? Fake book. We get, oh no, the kids are perfect. They've loved distance learning. Our spring break staycation was fabulous. So much fun. Look, even my humbly shared mistakes on Instagram are adorable. When in reality, right off screen, we're isolated, we're lonely, no one has clean underwear, and everyone is pretending they don't see the cat barf on the carpet so they don't have to clean it up. That's reality. And talking openly about mental health struggles makes a difference. So again, if you struggle with something, talk about it when you can. Let your kids, your friends, and family hear you talk about it. When we talk openly about mental health to friends and family, it sends a powerful normalizing message that it's all right. Our family talks about this, our community talks about this, Lake Oswego schools, we talk about this. It's normal. And it doesn't even have to be deep personal sharing to matter. I'm not talking about, recounting a download of your last conversation with your therapist in line at Safeway, or I'm not recommending super personal disclosures during office meetings, but just a little comment. A conversation that I had not a year ago or so with a mom, it just stuck with me. It was a carpool mom, and I couldn't take my turn. So I was telling her that, and I could have just said, hey, I need you to cover for me. I can't do it. But instead, I chose to just toss in for the conversation that I was dealing with some issues with my mom and the facility that she lived in and her depression. That little comment gave that mom a chance to let me know that she'd been down that same road with her father. She was able to support me. She was able to be a better friend to me, and she was able to share some resources with me that I didn't know about. And for someone right now who is in it right now, struggling and feeling like they're alone, your openness and vulnerability can be the key that unlocks their courage to get the help that they need. I know about the ugly power of the stigma of mental health that still happens. It's still part of our society. From my own story, from the hundreds of people with mental health issues that I've spoken to and their families, whenever I share my story, invariably somebody comes up to me afterwards and says, that's like my sister. That's what I'm going through with my kids. That's my story. And when I say that sounds really hard, who's walking alongside you? Who's your shoulder to cry on? Way too often I hear no one. I'm too ashamed. I'm embarrassed. I'm afraid of what people will think. And I've heard stories from people who were open, who were brave enough to be open, and heard things like, well, you're just not positive enough. You just, maybe take up some yoga, change your diet. You should pray more. Don't take medication because that makes you weak. And you should definitely try the essential oils. Not helpful. There is something worse than receiving unsolicited and cheesy advice from people on mental health issues, and that's silence. Silence conveys hopelessness. And I get it. When mental illness happens to someone we know, we often don't know what to do. We don't want to make it worse. We don't know what to say. We feel like we don't understand the disorder. We're not the experts. And maybe we think, well, they're always going to be this way. Can't change. They're not going to get better. So what can you do for somebody who's having a bad mental health day or a mental health crisis? Give them the necessary space and grace that you would give a coworker who is recovering from COVID-19, or a family member who needed a lot of physical therapy appointments to recover from surgery. At the end of the session, we'll share some information so you can get some handouts from me with a lot of different suggestions and ways to think about this and ways that you can help. But basically the summary is anything you would do for somebody who just had a baby or just came out of surgery. Take them a meal. Lasagna is love. If you've got a kid in the psych unit and little kids at home that are hungry, that can mean everything. And I would ask that we are right now really bold and intentional with each other, check in with each other. After the year that we've had, we are not all okay. So check in with each other. Allow me just a brief tangent that I think is really relevant to our community. And that is that I think we need to be, as we re-enter normal, that we think about what practices we want to keep and what practices we don't want to keep from this pandemic time, particularly when it comes to the pressure to achieve in this community for our kids. Many of us had no choice during the last year but to get used to more margin and more quiet time, quieter schedules. And we have a choice about how that comes back. You as a parent have a choice about how that returns to your child's life. And I just want you to think about the fact that too often we want our kids to do well instead of helping our kids be well. We have equated in this country achievement with success and success with happiness. But the truth is, success and happiness are not directly correlated. Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, help your kids be well. All right, so enough of the conceptual stuff. What about your kid? Recognize, first of all, that re-entry and going back to school has maybe been just as stressful as not going to school for our kids, even if it's what they wanted, and certainly was what we wanted. So keep talking about that. If you are asking the question, does my kid need help? I'm worried about their mental health. What do I do? If you are asking the question, call someone. Remember what you did when they were babies. And you would call the pediatrician over the silliest thing. You'd be calling that advice nurse. My kid has a hangnail and I'm really concerned it's going to be infected and that's going to lead to an amputation. What do I do? Should I come in? Right? We didn't care. We weren't worried about being embarrassed or asking dumb questions. But we get all jacked up when it's our kids' brains. Be aware of the symptoms that you know about and the symptoms you might not have been aware of for the more common issues like anxiety and depression. And know that you are the expert on your kid. You know what's different, you know when something's wrong, and you are the one that can be the advocate for them and help them get help. When it comes to anxiety, you're looking for worry, for new or unreasonable fears about the future, about going places, about groups of people, sudden unexpected physical symptoms like heart pounding, can't breathe, dizzy, shaky, sweaty, that's panic attacks. Racing thoughts, sleep problems, irritability and anger, stomach aches, and headaches. When it comes to depression, feeling sad, hopeless, or irritable a lot of the time, not wanting to do or enjoy fun things, changes in eating patterns, changes in sleep patterns, changes in energy patterns, having a hard time paying attention, feeling worthless, useless, self-injury, or self-destructive behavior. And I want to note, I know I raced through those, but they're easily Googled on the interwebs. There's a lot of overlap between anxiety and depression. And not only that, but some of you may have noticed that some of those symptoms are similar to the symptoms of ADHD. Sometimes they're similar to the symptoms of trauma. And so that's why we need an expert to parse it all out with us. And that overlap, goes both ways and it can be confusing. Our senior, Aiden, has struggled with many of the symptoms of depression and anxiety for several years. We knew that, and we were getting Aiden help. What was a surprise and will be a forever source of ongoing mom guilt is the ADHD diagnosis he received this December at the age of 17. Well, we thought it was depression and anxiety, and in fact, it was both. And pretty severe when it came to the depression and the anxiety. And in fact, early one morning, this last January, Aiden came to us and told us that he needed to go to the hospital, that he was suicidal. So we took him to the ER and he wound up being admitted to the hospital, to the psychiatric unit, and stayed for 2 weeks getting treatment for severe depression. And I don't know that I will ever be more grateful for anything in my life than I am that Aiden was able to come to us and tell us about those suicidal thoughts and that day, suicidal plans. I know that none of us want to have that conversation with our kids. Nobody wants to talk to your kids about suicide and suicidal thoughts because frankly, we'd like to believe they've never even heard of that. They have. And I want to assure you that if you talk to them about it, you will not put ideas in their head. You will not make them more likely to act on those ideas. In fact, you will show them that you are a person who they can talk to about this, that you are safe, you won't freak out. It can be a tremendous relief for kids to know that everybody or most people at some point have suicidal thoughts and that they're normal, but they are a signal that we need to get more help. Those thoughts don't have to be in charge, and your kids need to hear that from you. They need to hear that mental illness is real, that depression is real, that you can get better, that you would get them the help that they need, and you would take it seriously. The earlier you start those conversations, the less weird it will be, and the easier it will be for them to learn to talk to you about it. So don't wait, talk to them. And I will tell you that Aiden's doing much better, and that I would never have shared that if I didn't have Aiden's full permission. I asked, and Aiden said, "Mom, I'm not hiding anything," which I think is a signal, by the way, of how our kids' generation handles mental health issues. They're way more open than we are. So again, if you think they're not talking about it, you're wrong. They're talking about it. Finally, don't feel like you've got the luxury to wait it out to figure something out. You might not have that luxury right now because the mental health system is completely overwhelmed. Because of the pandemic and everything that's going on, it is very difficult to get in to see a therapist and a psychiatrist sometimes right now. You can't even get them to return calls and emails. So don't wait too long, all right? And if you can't get in somewhere right away and it's not an emergency that requires a trip to the ER, lean on your resources, lean on these wonderful therapists and social workers and school counselors that we have on this call, on teachers, on the other people in your life. And remember, there are things that your child needs that only you can do best. Your child needs to hear from you that they are loved unconditionally for who they are, even when you hear all their big feelings and their fears. They need you to listen without judgment. Help me understand. Tell me more. They need you to be the calm, safe space in their storm and let them know they're not alone. They need to know you'll take them seriously, including their safety. Don't brush them off and hope it's just a phase. Don't be afraid to ask hard questions and respond calmly as you can. And you can hope for them when they don't feel hopeful. And that goes true for anyone in your life who's suffering with mental health issues. You can hope for them until they can hope for themselves. Help them dream and see a future. And you can remind your kids who they really are and what their strengths and their gifts are that they bring to this world. Together, we have the antidote to the shame and the isolation and the loneliness of mental illness. Together, we can create communities that get it right on mental health, communities where people feel safe being real and talking to each other about what's going on and reaching out and getting the help that they need. Changing that conversation changes lives and saves lives. So thank you all so much for being here today. And now we've got a good chunk of time for questions and answers. And I will answer anything I can. I will tell you what answers I do not have. We might refer some things to the social workers and counselors, but now is the time for that.
So there's a few questions in the chat, and I would say to everyone, if you feel more comfortable, you can send your question in the chat and I'll read it out, or you are free to unmic and ask it directly, but I will go through the questions in the chat. First one that came in, and it was early on in your talk, and you mentioned latent genetic tendencies and referred to that. What are some of those? I'm not sure if that's a question for Tara or...
I can answer that. Some mental health issues are genetic. They are handed down in our families along with other genetic things that we get, our eye color, our hair color, our tendency to get depression, or perhaps bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. And what I meant by that, and I know this I don't think it's controversial, but I'm not attempting to be judgmental in any way here, but the truth is that our emergency rooms are frequently overwhelmed with particularly young adults and teenagers who are experiencing new mental health systems because of their marijuana use. It is believed that the marijuana that is out and being used today, which is much more powerful than anything, say 20 years ago, can trigger psychosis. And sometimes once you've triggered that, it's kind of hard to turn that switch off. So that's what I meant by that. And if anybody wants to follow up with me and get more information about that, I'm happy to share that.
Just a lot of love in the chat for your family and Aiden, and just big props for being able to share that and have that conversation.
And don't anybody be weird, okay? Like if you see Aiden, like don't be like, oh, Aiden, no, don't do that. But yeah, he said it was fine.
Another question: how do you get your kids back into the rhythm of being around groups of people? How do we ease them back into normal?
My short answer to that is talking about it, acknowledging it feels awkward, acknowledging you can't remember how to say hi sometimes. And then I'll let the school counselors jump in if they've got some thoughts about easing back into that school routine.
I'll share one thing. I'm Gary Keyser. I'm the counselor at Westridge. One thing that can help ease it is starting with, a lot of kids have been almost exclusively experiencing virtual contact with peers, or some kids have even struggled to do that. And I think that's a good place to start. A lot of the school counselors and other things at school offer some activities, like at Westridge, we have like some lunch social groups, and they're just 20 to 30 minutes. We get together, we play some games and chat while we eat lunch. And it's a good like kind of warm up where it's kind of semi-structured. I think trying to set some of those things up with your kiddo, where it's not necessarily a video game that they're having connection with, but just a talk, and start short, and really just like anything else, like exercising, you don't go first put 500 pounds on the bench press bar on your first workout. You're going to start working up slowly, and just be patient and know that you're going to need to take as much time as it's going to take, and it's going to be different for everyone. And I think then just debriefing with your kid after each time that they have some social contact to kind of see what went well and how they felt, and then just gauge it slowly like that. But definitely be patient. Don't jump into the deep end.
I would also add one more thing to that, is that it kind of goes back to, we have to reteach them those social skills that, remember back in kindergarten and preschool when they had to learn, those basic things of saying hi to people and walking up to them and asking them a question. And truly, students, even adults have forgotten how to do that. So to acknowledge, I think what Tara said, acknowledge this is so awkward, right? We haven't been around each other. So remind them, and I had to tell my 5th grader, that's your buddy. You can go say hi now, and it was kind of that awkwardness, and accepting that and acknowledging it, and just really teaching the strategies, reteaching the strategies.
In my family, we have definitely run the gamut from teenagers who maybe weren't being as socially distanced as appropriate over the last year, and other teenagers who would not spend time outside spread apart from their friends because they were so anxious. So it's tough for our kids. I know, any of you see me on the street, I'm going to be super awkward for a while. I just, no question, more than normal.
I'm going to stop the recording right now just so that people can feel free to talk, but